Welcome to CC Writes. My name is CC Lepke. Today I'm sharing the third part of my Nanowrimo novel, Guns and Glitter. Before I begin, please don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell notification button so you'll know when the next part of the story comes out. Also, please pay attention to the content warning coming up because this episode gets pretty intense. The director sat behind a large wooden desk with a dual-screened computer perched on one corner. Bookshelves stacked with paper and files lined one wall, and another wall had a side table shoved in the corner with partially deflated balloons wishing him a quick recovery. "Miss Marroquin, it's a pleasure to meet you." The man stood and reached across the table to shake Grace's hand. She barely had a chance to reach out before he gripped her fingers, forcing her to limply allow him to shake her arm briefly before he let go. "Please, have a seat." Grace sat down and waited patiently for him to begin the interview. Instead, he examined her over steepled fingers until the both of them were silent so long that Grace began to feel uncomfortable. She gripped the end of one of her dark locks of hair and idly ran her fingers through it. When the silence reached the point of being completely intolerable, he leaned back in his chair and spoke. "Miss Marroquin, what is it that you think I do?" Grace opened her mouth to reply, then froze. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat and worried at the lock of hair until it was a tangled mess. "You're the director of personnel, so you oversee human resources and compliance with employment laws. Mediate disputes between employees, develop human resource policies, things like that." The director made a non-committal noise that was neither agreement nor dissent. "I suppose that was an unfair question. Technically, yes, those are my job functions, but I mean from a human perspective. What do you think my job requires?" Grace was silent. From the way he spoke, she couldn't tell if it was a rhetorical question. Either way, there were hundreds of possible answers, but from the stern set of his jaw and the way he watched her over steepled fingers, she could tell he wanted a very specific answer that she wasn't sure she could give after having just met him. She froze again. Her chest was heavy. A cold sense of impending doom made all the muscles in her back tense at once. He was challenging her, asserting dominance in an obvious and very old-school way, and she didn't like it. She leaned forward in her seat and looked him right in the eye without flinching. "Why don't you tell me what it is you do, from a human perspective?" The director's expression didn't change. He shifted his posture to cross an ankle over his knee and leaned hard against the armrest, strictly casual. "I'm in the business of people. Most people see management as a pyramid, with people who have power at the top and people who lack power, the majority, at the base." He smiled, but it wasn't a comforting expression. "I like to think of it as an inverted pyramid. It's my job to support the numerous people who work for this company and make sure everyone has what they need. It's about relationships. I want to employ someone who would lend their neighbor a cup of sugar. Do you see what I mean?" "You see yourself as a relationship facilitator." Grace struggled to see what that had to do with her. She wasn't interviewing for his job. "Exactly." He watched her for another silent moment. "I've been doing this job for over 20 years. I pride myself on knowing my employees and cultivating people that I'm sure will be a good fit for the organization." "That's good to hear." Grace lifted her chin and sat up just a little straighter. "Working for PazTech is a dream of mine. Medical technology to support disadvantaged people really hits home with me and my family. My Tio Paulo has been in a wheelchair for as long as I can remember. The exosuit in development from PazTech would change his life. I've been watching the videos online to keep track of its progress." The director nodded absently. "Yes, it will change a lot of lives. I don't need someone who just knows of our company. We're looking for somebody who would be like family." He leaned far back in the chair and nodded quietly to himself. "Miss Marroquin, what would you say your greatest weakness is?" Grace ground her teeth. She hated that question, but everyone insisted on asking it. "As a fresh graduate, I have less real-world experience than some others, but I'm a quick learner and I know how to adapt. I'm certain I could do a better job than anyone else." The chair squeaked as the director leaned forward again. He made a face, obviously unhappy with Grace's answer. "Why don't we take a break from the interview for the moment and I'll give you a little advice. When someone asks you what your greatest weakness is, you're supposed to pick a strength and play it off as a weakness. You know, I'm too dedicated to my work, I'm a perfectionist, that kind of thing. Do you understand?" "I prefer to tell the truth." He waved his hand as if to brush her morality to the side. "It isn't really a lie, it's what's expected." The director stood. "Another piece of advice for you. A good handshake will tell you everything you need to know about a person. You have to grip the hand firmly, fast and clean. Shaking your hand was like holding onto a limp noodle. You come across as meek, and we need people who can assert themselves." He held out his hand again. "Let me show you how it's done." Grace's hackles were up, but she allowed the old man to grab her wrist and force her hand into his as he squeezed so hard the bone shifted. He commanded her to squeeze back until the pressure of her handshake was to his satisfaction. 5 minutes later, the interview was over. She didn't get the job. There was no need for a formal phone call or an apologetic email to know the director wouldn't recommend her for the position, all because of a stupid handshake. She found herself standing out by the street once again, feeling like the most worthless person on the planet. Why does this always happen to me? It wasn't just the false start interview at the strip club, or failing an interview because the old fart had an archaic notion about how a strong person shakes a hand. It was 5 months of that happening every day, over and over, until she was broken to pieces. It was her father in the hospital again, the medical bills piling up on top of her parents' reverse mortgage. It was having to move back in with her parents even though she was 25 years old and should be able to live on her own by now. Grace kicked the stone staircase that led up to the Paztec entryway. She threw her purse at the ground and kicked that too, just for good measure. It wasn't right. The deck was stacked against her because of an accident of birth. She should have been able to overcome it with hard work, but even that wasn't enough. So Grace did the only thing she could do. She raged impotently against a harmless staircase and her own cheap purse and wished again and again that there was some way she could win for once in her pathetic life. But there wasn't. She knew that clearly. There was never a way for her to win. There were only ways for her to keep surviving until she didn't bother to keep fighting anymore. That was what life was like for people like Grace. A car horn blared. Grace looked up at the crowded street and clenched her fists. For the second time that day, she dusted herself off and picked up her purse. There was no use crying over the inevitable. She just had to keep going, keep fighting for a better life, just like she always did. Her heels clacked against the cement a little louder than normal, but she was moving. Grace beat a path from one building to another, dropping off her resume with anyone who would take it. She smiled, laughed, chatted up receptionists. Sometimes she flirted if it seemed like it would get her anywhere. It was all a numbers game, really. She didn't need to turn a no into a yes. There were over 100,000 businesses located in Esperanza. Only one of them needed to say yes. For hours, Grace canvassed the business district of Esperanza trying to find her yes. Her stack of resumes and reference letters thinned, then disappeared. By the time she was done, the sky was a heavy burnt orange color as the sun dipped low behind the massive skyscrapers. Daytime traffic congestion gave way to the city's nightlife as clubs and bars lit their signs and the LCD billboards mounted on skyscrapers cast a false glow over the streets below. Grace was starving. Her day was long, exhausting, and a disappointment. But she was still moving. For today, that would have to be enough. At long last, she took off her scuffed and worn-out heels and walked barefoot to the nearest bus stop. It would take an hour to get home by bus, but the reward of a hot bath and her mother's buttered tortillas was a reward well worth the effort. The shelter of the bus stop was already crowded. The bus would be there in just a few minutes. Grace heaved a sigh of relief. It was usually 15 minutes between buses, and the streets were dangerous enough at night that she didn't want to wait long by herself. She picked up her pace to reach the other passengers quickly. As Grace passed the mouth of an alleyway, something rattled next to her, and a dark shadow leapt toward her. She let out a scream of terror as a rail-thin cat leapt from a trash can and raced across the road. A glass bottle rolled forward and lightly bumped her bare foot. Heart working violently in her chest, Grace laughed and leaned against the wall. She hated surprises, but getting scared of a stupid cat was just plain silly. With a shake of her head, she straightened and took a couple of slow steps forward. She could see the bus 3 blocks away, so she needed to hurry. Someone grabbed her from behind and dragged her back toward the alley. Grace screamed and lashed out against the heavily muscled man who crushed her wrists inside of his hands. He hit her once in the stomach as she screamed, and she choked on an urge to vomit. Her head swam, but she kept fighting. Down the road, several people at the bus station watched anxiously as she struggled at the mouth of the alleyway with a man who clearly wanted to hurt her. She screamed for them again. "Help! Help me!" A couple of people took out their phones, but no one made a move as the bus pulled up in front. The door opened. "Somebody! Please!" Desperation tore a feral cry out of her throat as the people at the bus stop turned away and got on the bus. Grace was alone. She sobbed in anguish as the man tripped her. She fell onto her face against the dirty cement. He grabbed her ankles and started to drag her into the alleyway. Flailing around, her hands latched onto the only weapon she could find, the bottle that the cat knocked from the trash can. She smashed it against the ground so that it broke in a jagged line. With a wild kick, she flipped herself around to face her attacker and slashed across his face. The bottle cut deep and he reeled back, but Grace wasn't done with him yet. Terrified and overburdened by feral rage, Grace dove at the man and stabbed him, once in the thigh and then again in the side. He shouted and shoved her off, then turned and ran away. Grace clutched the bloody bottle in a shaking fist, breathing heavily as tears left a trail of grime down her cheeks. She picked up her shoes and limped to the now empty bus stop. It would be another 15 minutes before the next bus arrived. She stood with her heels dangling from one hand and a bloody bottle clutched in the other as the streetlights began to flicker to life. For what it was worth, that was life for Graciela Marroquin. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Guns and Glitter. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. If you've been following along, then you'll know that I lost all my regular assets when my computer broke during the month of November. I'm still trying to get that fixed, but until then, I thought I'd try doing things this way with the pictures that represent the story. Do you guys like it? Would you prefer to see more of the rough drawings like I was doing before? Or do you want video of me telling the story? Please let me know what you prefer, or if you have another idea for how I can best present the story, and I'll see what I can do. Thank you so much for following along with my story and for watching CC Writes.
I really love sharing my writing with people, so I'm grateful that I have any number of subscribers to share this with. Once I've finished sharing this entire rough draft with you, I'd like to make a few videos where I show you my editing process with the same story so that you can see how I develop something from a rough draft like this one into a polished novel. I also have a few ideas for more content like this in the works, so please stick around, like, comment, and subscribe for more stories from me. See you later.